Protection of Information Assets, Part 2. Logical access controls are the primary method that are used to protect information assets. They're the direct result of management-driven security policies and procedures designed to safeguard assets and reduce organizational risk to acceptable levels. As an IS auditor, you need to understand this critical aspect of information security management. Well, the first step of the process as we look at logical access controls is to understand the exposures and vulnerabilities of logical access. Now, here's a list of 14 things that you need to know for the CISA exam. Obviously, there's quite a few other exposures and vulnerabilities, but we're going to focus on these 14, which are pretty well known. Now, realize when it comes to attacks on logical access in your environment, that attacks come in really 4 different kinds of categories. You got, first of all, what are called unstructured attacks, okay? Unstructured attacks are basically just accidental, unintentional activities that interfere with normal activities and processing. Then you have what are called structured attacks. Structured attacks are ones that are formulated by a malicious user or a cracker. Then you have what are called internal attacks, which originate from inside your organization, and of course, external attacks, which originate from the outside of your organization. So your attacks can be different combinations of either unstructured internal, for an example, an employee who accidentally breaks the security policy, or it could be a structured external attack, a cracker trying to get through a firewall or a perimeter router to inject a virus or a logic bomb, for example, into your organization. So we want to understand that first delineation of these first 4 types of attacks. Then we want to look at these different vulnerabilities. Now, I put these in alphabetical order, so there's no real kind of rhyme or reason as far as the order of these. The first one is actually a very specific and very highly technical type of exposure. And an asynchronous attack occurs by taking advantage of the way that a multiprocessor on a PC or a server allocates CPU resources. For instance, oftentimes a resource is requested but isn't immediately available. So the operating system is going to store that request, and when the resources become available, like memory addressing or processor, it'll perform them in the order in which the resources become available, or possibly according to a job's priority. And you can set different priorities in application systems, like Windows 2003, for example. So what intruders do, they take advantage of this by causing large application programs that have these kind of checkpoint and restart capabilities to actually initiate a checkpoint restart. And this basically freezes up the application or the program. It's called an asynchronous attack because it's not necessarily timed with the actual processing of the application. Another attack is called a computer shutdown attack, and possibly you've run into these on your own PC system, where you've got terminal connections or PCs that are online or in dial-up connections, and typically only the administrator should be able to initiate the shutdown process. But some systems have been shown to be vulnerable to shutting themselves down when certain things occur, like overload in memory or overload in processor. So basically, malicious users take advantage of the logical access controls that can actually shut down a computer system, like a laptop, for example. Another logical exposure is data leakage, and this is basically when information or data leaks out of a computer or is siphoned off by a malicious user. This could be dumping files to a hard copy at a printer or into a text file that can be printed. It could be stealing computer tapes that are used for backup. Typically with data leakage, the original copy is left on the system so that it goes undetected. We don't remove the original file, we make a copy of that file or a printed version of that file. Now, one of the most common ways to mitigate against data leakage is a process called extrusion prevention. Maybe you've heard of intrusion prevention systems that actually have signature-based databases that inspect packets as they come through a network, either attached to a switch in promiscuous mode or in the line of the normal traffic. Well, extrusion prevention actually prevents sensitive data from leaving the original source. As a matter of fact, in 2006, in a survey by Merrill Lynch, the leakage of confidential proprietary information was identified as the #1 issue facing chief information security officers. So extrusion prevention is kind of a newer technology that's used to protect any asset, which if lost, could have a significant negative impact on the organization. A fourth logical access exposure is that of denial of service attacks. A DOS attack is the attempt to make a computer resource unavailable to users. It uses a wide variety of approaches which basically prevent the service or the site from functioning efficiently or functioning at all, either indefinitely or temporarily. Big targets are typically high-profile web servers or DNS, domain name servers. Now, DOS attacks are implemented by forcing a targeted server to reset or consume all of its resources so that it can't provide its intended service, or it will obstruct the communication media between the users and the victimized server so they can't communicate adequately. The categories of these DOS attacks are just too many to mention. You've got SYN floods, ICMP floods, UDP floods, teardrop attacks, peer-to-peer attacks, nukes, distributed DOS attacks, the list goes on and on. A logic bomb is simply a chunk of code that gets placed into a software system or an application that's going to instigate some malicious activity whenever certain conditions are met. For example, a cracker might put a piece of code that starts deleting files, like in the HR salary database or the benefits database, whenever the employee leaves the company. We're going to talk about viruses and worms here in a second. They may also contain logic bombs that are going to set off a certain payload at a predetermined time or whenever some condition is met in the system, like April Fool's Day, for example. Piggybacking is an interesting concept. It has a couple of different definitions. It could be simply the act of following an authorized person through a secure door without being seen, as is typically done in movies. Or you could electronically attach to an authorized telecommunication link, for example, to the internet, to intercept and alter transmissions. This is also done quite a bit in wireless internet connections, when you bring your own computer into the range of another wireless connection without the subscriber's permission or knowledge. It's very common for somebody who has a laptop with a pretty powerful antenna to pull up in front of somebody's house and just use their wireless connectivity for the internet. Have you ever seen the movie Office Space? I think it's pretty hilarious. It's kind of a 1999 cult comedy film by Mike Judge, the guy who did Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. And it's just basically a satirization of the life in a typical software company during the late 90s. And basically what these three guys do to get back at their company for massive layoffs is to infect the accounting system with a computer virus. And this is also known as a salami attack, and I kind of left the A out here. A salami attack. It's kind of a combination of a salami attack and rounding down. Rounding down is basically when you draw off small amounts of money from a computerized transaction or an account, and then you take off you round it down and then take off whatever's left over and you put it into your own checking account, your own savings account. And since it's so small, it typically goes unnoticed. This is also referred to as a salami technique. So really rounding down and salami attacks are kind of the same thing. And what's funny about this movie, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. They actually use this attempt, this salami attack, this rounding down method. Fortunately, the company is set on fire, well, I guess not fortunately, by some other disgruntled employee, and all of the evidence gets burned down, including their briefcase full of unsigned traveler's checks as well. Here's a quick sound clip of the disgruntled employee who ultimately burns down the office building.
Mr. Lumberg told me to talk to payroll, and then payroll told me to talk to Mr. Lumberg, and I still haven't received my paycheck, and he took my stapler. And he never brought it back, and then they moved my desk to storage room B.
Next we have a trap door, and a trap door is really kind of a programming phenomenon. It's an exit point that's built into a component of authorized operating system code where specific logic can be inserted, like a program interrupt, for example, that inspects data during the processing process. Now a trapdoor can be there because of for testing reasons, for testing the code, or for maintaining the code. Sometimes the programmer will insert the trapdoor to bypass the operating system's integrity for debugging or for later maintenance or system improvements. The problem is this can be a flaw if a hacker or a cracker or a malicious user finds out about this trapdoor. A Trojan horse is kind of like a virus in the sense that it contains malicious code or installs malicious code, which is a payload or a Trojan, under the auspices that it's actually some other harmless program. Many times it's disguised by a little utility or a tool or a game. One type of Trojan horse will actually insert malicious code that executes when the program